Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur VaAshamos. It's on the second page, and it's line 19. It's Mishna Hay. Okay. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur. The shechting of a communal korban Shlamim. Now we know what a Shlamim is, right? Shlamim is a korban that makes peace between Hashem and the kohen and the owner of the korban. They all share the meat. And I've been setting you up. We haven't gotten to Shlamim. Shlamim is going to be 2 Mishnas from now, to explain to you the whole idea of a Shlamim in a very, very enlightened way. That Shlamim means that we and Hashem sit at the same table and share the same food, which is a funny concept. And Korbanos B'chalal is an interesting idea. Like I explained to you at length, that Lahavla Chavdals by Goyim have a din of Korbanos and din Torah, but Goyim can only bring an Olah. Because when you give a korban to Hashem, you don't get to sit at the same table and eat. It doesn't make sense. By Yidden, there is this incredible additional gift that not only can we give Hashem a korban kvayachol, but we get to share the korban with Him. But that's primarily by kachum kalim, by offerings of korbanos, which are of a lower level. And we're going to talk about it in Mitzvah Hashem when we get to it. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur is a korban shlamim that's not brought by a person. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur is a korban shlamim which is brought by the whole community. And there is exactly one such korban. There's one korban shlamim shel tzibur a year. There's one korban shlamim shel tzibur a year. And that is on Shavuos. Shavuos, there was a korban which was called shtei halechem. Shavuos was a korban of bread, of Chametz. It was the only korban tzibur of Chametz also, that was brought to the Beis HaMikdash on Shavuos. And when the bread offering was offered in the Beis HaMikdash on Shavuos, the bread went along with 2 animals that are called Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur. It's a korban shlamim, which was given on behalf of the entire community. There was no other korban like that during the entire year. So it's a shlamim. It's a peace offering. But it's not a peace offering which is brought by an individual. It's a peace offering which is brought by the entire community. And it's brought in conjunction with bread. And the halach of the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur is that it's only eaten by the kohanim. It's a shlamim, it's a peace offering, but it's not really a peace offering. Because if it was truly a peace offering, we would eat it. And we don't. Only kohanim eat it. So it's a very, very unusual korban. It's a very, very unusual korban. It's the only korban of its kind. It's called a shlamim. It's called an offering brought for peace. No, it's not an offering brought for sin. It's an offering brought for peace. But because it's an offering brought for peace by the community, by the tzibur, it's not considered an ordinary shlam. It's eaten only by the kohanim. VaAshamos. Ashamos means sin offerings. Asham means an aveda. Ashamos means a sin offering. But you must understand that normally a sin offering is called a Chatos, right? The typical word in Torah for a korban associated with an aveda is a Chatos. There is a basic difference between a Chatos and an Asham. The difference between a Chatos and an Asham is that a Chatos, if it's a private Chatos at least, has to be female, or Asham has to be male. I plan in Mitzvah Hashem to get back to this difference because it's a critical point in this Mishnah. But the Mishnayos puts together these 2 categories of a korban. It's a korban shlamim of the community, which is not mamish a shlamim. It's a korban chatos of a yachid, but it's not mamish a chatos. That's how you would have to understand it. A korban shlamim is a peace offering where we get to sit with Hashem and eat. This is a different kind of shlamim. A korban chatos is a sin offering, which is associated with sin. This is a different kind of sin offering. And the Mishnayos puts, I guess you want to call it, the elevated shlamim and the lowered chatos into the same Mishnah. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur VaAshamos is put together. The korban shlamim, which is not really a shlamim, and the korban asham, which is not really a chatos, are put into the same Mishnah. Like I said before, what's unique about an asham is an asham has to be dafka zochar, a male animal, and chatos hayachid, as a rule, a sin offering brought by the individual is supposed to be a female. We'll get to it in a moment. And I read on. Eluhain ashamos. These are categories of Hashames, and the Mishnah lists 6 types of Asham. The Ramak says that the 6th type of Asham goes on the 6 midas. He holds that a Korban Olah and a Shlamim are both the midas of the Feres, which is why they're put together. We're going to get to these details in later classes. Okay? Number 1, Asham Gezelis. A sin offering called an Asham if you steal. Asham Gezelis is not a carbon that you bring for stealing. For stealing, you have to pay double. Asham Gezelis is for stealing and being accused and swearing falsely that you didn't steal. And it's one of the rarest Korbanos of all. It's one of the rarest Korbanos of all because Asham Gezelis is for a mazid. Asham Gezelis is one of the few Korbanos that a person brings when he did Naveid on purpose. You lied with intent. You knew that you stole and you were brought into Bezdin and that you were accused of stealing and you swore that you hadn't stolen. If you later admit, if you later admit that you're a God, from the rare cases where a korban is brought for Naveid done on purpose, but the korban that you do for this Naveid done on purpose is not a Chatos, it's an Asham, Asham Gezelis. The sin offering, and I'll say these words even though now they have very little meaning, which is male for stealing, because I stole on purpose. The next is Asham Me'iles, a sin offering for the abuse of Kachim. The word Me'ila means abuse. The literal translation word means abuse. Okay, but you see there's a very big difference between abusing private property and public property. It's a basic human nature. What's the difference between abusing private property and public property? If I abuse private property, I hurt a person. If I abuse public property, who did I hurt? Really? Well, everyone was already hurt when the private was made public. Right? When the government takes our taxes, it ain't our money no more, unless you're a very, very, very conscientious voter. So Asham Me'iles means it's a sin offering brought for the abuse of public property. But in Yiddishkeit, public property is kachim, it's holy. Either it's called Kedushas HaGuf, I abused. Kedushas HaGuf means a physical animal which was meant to be a korban, that the body of the animal itself was holy. Or I abused what's called Kedushas Damim, that it has a monetary value which was going to be used for holy purposes, like the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash and other kinds of things like that. So Asham Me'iles means a sin offering which is brought for abuse. Now, the truth is, I'm speaking it in a political language because I want you to hear the chap. But Asham Me'iles means I'm abusing kachim. Something which is holy and belongs to the Eibishter, whether it's holy and belongs to the Eibishter because it's a korban, or it's holy and belongs to the Eibishter because it belongs to matters related to the support of the Beis HaMikdash. If I abuse that, if I damage it, so I have to pay. Obviously, I have to pay for what I stole, and also have to pay 20%. I don't pay double, I pay 20%, I pay chomesh, and I have to bring a korban which is called Asham Me'iles. And Asham Me'iles is only brought if you did it by mistake. If you abused a kachim on purpose, it's like a chatos. You can only bring the korban if it was by mistake. If you did the aved on purpose, you cannot bring this asham. Number 3, Asham Shivcha Charufa. Asham Shivcha Charufa is a really, really weird korban. It's a pure Gzeres HaKosov. I suppose the details are certainly Gzeres HaKosov. They're very unusual halachas. Asham Shivcha Charufa means I had a relationship with a married woman who's not married. If you have a relationship with a married woman, you have misa, right? But she's married and she's not married. How could a woman be married and not married? The answer is she's a shivcha. Shivcha is property, and she's necharefes leish, a maidservant.
What's the root of necharefes?
Necharefes leish. I think it actually says ein le'ed b'mikra. It's one of those words that's very, very hard to define. She's betrothed to a Jew. She's engaged conditionally, that when she's going to go through Giyur, in other words, when she's going to get her Shichrur, when she's going to be redeemed, she's going to be married. But she's not redeemed yet. And Medach says that some Shittas hold that's a Chatzei Evet, Chatzei Ben Chayden. She's half redeemed and half not redeemed, but I don't remember this detail. It's a weird halach. It's a very unusual case where if she was a Bas Chayden, if she was a Jewish woman, you'd be Chayv Miseh. But she's not a Bas Chayden, she's a Shivcha. But she's a shivcha necharefes leish. She's engaged conditionally to a Jew, meaning that when she's going to go through giyur, or in her case shichrur, and when a slave is freed, they automatically become a full yid. So she'll become an eshes ish, but she's not yet freed. So she gets malchus, and he brings a korban. And the korban that he brings is called Hasham Shifcha Charufa. It's a very unusual kind of a korban. And I believe that Hasham Shifcha Charufa is also, it's bemazed and b'sheigig. It's also one of those very, very unusual cases. You have very few instances in Torah where you can bring a korban for a sin done on purpose. Because b'chlal, Korbanos and sin shouldn't go together. I explained this to you when we talked about Chatos. If you did something wrong, cower. Hide in the corner. Be ashamed. The story with the Frierdiker Rebbe that I told you, it's the Chassidim had a tradition that when you do an Aveda, you go into the Rebbe and you confess, and the Rebbe is going to give a tikkun tshuva. But there was a chassid who came into the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he confessed all of his sins, and the Rebbe said to his secretary after he walked out, the guy comes in, he tells me all of his Avedas, and he has no shame. Confessing a sin is useful if the confession comes along with shame and regret. But if the confession of the sin comes along with indifference, the halach is you're not allowed to confess in front of a person for this very reason. It says in Hilchos Yom Kippurim that for a sin between man and man you have to confess to the fellow person. A sin between man and God, you're not allowed to confess to any man, only to God. Because confessing another man is making a joke out of the confession, because it shows that you don't care. So when you do an Aveda, you're supposed to be ashamed. Don't bring a korban. A korban means you became friendly with the Eibishter. So Chatos is for a sheigig. You didn't do it on purpose, even though, as I explained to you a number of times, sheigig does not mean an accident. Sheigig does not mean an accident. Sheigig means a miscalculation. An accident is no korban. If something happened completely by accident, I have no chiyuv. A sheigig is something I did with intent, but I made a mistake. Perhaps I made a mistake even about one detail. It's already called a sheigig. But to bring a korban for an Aveda done on purpose, b'mezid, and you have to assume it means be'edim and asra, that's very, very strange. So first of all, you don't bring a chatos. You don't bring a chatos. You bring an asham. You don't bring a feminine korban, you bring a masculine korban. I'm going to explain later what the difference between the two is. And this is the second example. For this Aveda of Shifcha Charufa, she's a Shifcha. She's not Jewish. But when she's going to become a Jew, she will be married automatically. So you bring this korban. Rabbi, you were going to say?
How can you tell that he's doing it for a mason?
I don't understand. He brings the korban because he did an Aveda before.
Right.
That Aveda was done Beidim of Asra.
You're saying so he should have a bushel.
I'm saying a rule. If a person does an Aveda on purpose, there's no korban. If I have Machal Shabbat Farhesia and there's no Eidim, so I can't be put to death, right? So what's my einish? My einish is kares. But in Bezdin there's no punishment and there's no korban. So at Machal Shabbat B'Sheger in Chatos Kavua. Why? To bring a korban is an intimacy with Hashem. I talked about this. When a person does an Aveda, who comes to the Beibishter? It's one of the rare gifts Hashem gave us, Yidden. I said to you, Goyim can bring Korbanos in Dinei Torah. But the korban of a guy is only an oila. You give it away. You did an Aveda, and oila is a different kind of korban, because an oila is not about an Aveda. Oila is about a connection. But for your Aveda, stay home, do tshuva in private. Yidden were given a korban Chatos. I did a particular Aveda, I'm doing tshuva for that particular Aveda, but at least it's a sheigig. And here you have Ashamis. A Yid did an Aveda on purpose, and he's bringing a korban. So Asham Gazelis is bemezid, only bemezid. Asham Shifcha Charufa is both bemezid and b'sheigig. Number 4 is Asham Nazir. A sin offering brought by a Nazirite. When does a Nazir bring an Asham? When a Nazir finishes his Naziris, when a person is, Naziris is a form of Nedarim. It's the same thing. A Nazir is a Nadir with prescribed particulars from the Torah. You can't be a Nezer Lachatzayin. Hashem, when you say, I'm making a Neder and not to use this phone for 5 minutes, and I'm not saying this. If a person wants to make such a Neder, bli Neder, yeah? So then it's this phone. If I say I'm not going to use that phone, yeah? When Naziris, if I say I'm becoming a Nazir, automatically I've committed myself to a series of different things. I'm not going to drink wine, I'm not going to drink wine products, I'm not going to be Mitamal Mesim.
As you say, you're a Nazir?
Yeah, I think so. And also, I'm not going to cut my hair. And then stam the Naziris Shleishim Yom, the assumption is a Naziris is for 30 days unless you specify a different amount.
You allowed to drink wine? No.
Wine, of course not. The Shaila is Yain Sadaf, Mashke, alcohol. Technically, you're allowed. Even though the Tam of Naziris should preclude drinking anything alcoholic. But a Nazir is not allowed to eat grape. So even though it's connected to alcohol, but it's specifically yayin, v'sheichar, wine and beer which is made from wine product. Right, it said to Bikilkuli, Vesach Yalda says yayin, they say. So l'chayre yayin sheichar works better, yayin tzaraf works better than yayin geffen. But a Nazir does, if a person finishes his Nazir's kosher v'yosher, he brings a Chatos and an Olah and a Shlamim. The Asham you bring if you became Tamei. And the Lashon HaPosek is Bepesa Piseim. You became Tamei by mistake. Well, if a Nazir becomes Tamei on purpose, I think there's still a Asham Nazirus, although I didn't see it specifically this morning. But Asham Nazir you bring for becoming Tamei, and the way the Posek describes it, he became Tamei by accident. So you have to bring whatever you have to bring a number of Korbanos, and you bring an Asham. So I believe, although I'm not sure, that we're going to put Asham Naziros into the accident class. In other words, Asham Gazeles is an Asham which you bring only if you did it on purpose. Asham Shevcha Rufa is an Asham which you bring whether you did it on purpose or by mistake. Asham Me'ilis is only by mistake. Asham Nazir, I'm not sure about Asham Nazir, but I think certainly in the Lashon HaPosek it's by mistake. If you bring Asham Nazir, if you did it on purpose, I don't remember. I didn't see it this morning. And the fifth, Asham Tzeda. Asham Tzeda has nothing to do with an Aveda. Asham Tzeda has nothing to do with an Aveda. What's Asham Tzeda? There's a category in halacha which is called Mechusar Kippurim. When a person becomes Tamei, he has to go through a process of becoming Tahir. And the process of becoming Tahir has a variety of different forms. Obviously, the classic form of becoming Tahir from a Tuma'ah is using a mikveh. If you became Tamei L'meis, you have to have the ash of Para Aduma sprinkled on you. And after it's sprinkled on you on the third day and the seventh day, you anyways have to go to the mikveh, and then you're Tahir. And then, of course, a Zav needs to have a mikveh of Mei Mayon. It has to be Mayim Chayim, has to be a spring. It's not allowed to be a mikveh of a rainwater mikveh, has to be Dafka Mayim Chayim. For all kinds of tumahs, you have to go to mikveh. A Mitzayda has a series of strange halachas that involve shaving off all his hair, and taking two birds and dumping toiveling the bird with Aizev and Telas into the blood and the water and sprinkling it on the Mitzayda and sending the bird off into the field. But a Mitzayda becomes Tahir, first of all, the Tzaras leaves. The leprosy leaves his body. Then he has to go through the process of becoming Tahir, and then he goes to the mikveh. When he goes to the mikveh, he becomes a Tful Yom, he's Tahir, and when the sun sets, he's Tahir from Tful Yom. But a Mitzayda, and the same applies to a Yeldes and to a Zav and to a Zava, but they don't bring an Asham, is something called Mechusar Kippurim. It's a weird idea. If you become Tamei with certain Tumas, you don't become Tahir until you bring a Korban. You're allowed to eat Truma, right? The first Mishnah in Shas, Mishash HaKoinim Nechnasim Lachal B'Trumasan, a Koin who's Tful Yom Shehad of Shimsha can eat Truma, but he cannot eat Kachim until he brings the Korban the next day if he's a Mechusar Kippurim. A Mitzayda brings a Korban for Tahara, so it's not about idea at all. So Asham Mitzayda, you can't say it's on purpose. It's certainly not on purpose. It's not by accident either. It's the Shleimus of his Kapora. So it turns out that the two Ashames that are mazid are Gezeles and Shivcha Charufa. But so far you have 5 Ashames. Asham Gezeles, Asham Ilz, Asham Shivcha Charufa, Asham Nazar, Asham Mitzayda. What's the common of these 5? That you're bringing a sin offering for whatever kind of a sin you want to categorize it as, and the sin offering is male, is a zochar, not a female. Ukafi sheyizbayel lakama. I'm going to get back to this later on. And then comes the 6th category. The 6th category is called the Asham Talui. Asham Talui is a sin offering that a person brings. It's male and not female. It's an Asham, not a Chatos. If you're not sure if you didn't have Aveda. If you're not sure if you didn't have Aveda. Certainly it was by mistake. But in addition to be by mistake, you're not sure. The classic example of it is that if you have 2 pieces of fat in front of you, one is chaylev and one is shuman, one is kosher fat and one is treifa fat, and you ate one of the 2, and you don't know which one you ate, and you cannot check. So you have a suffix if you ate today for not. If you did a lav, you bring korban chatos. If you didn't do a lav, you can't bring a korban. Now chatos you can't bring on a suffix. You cannot bring a sin offering unless you're sure. There's a special dispensation which is called Chatos ha'oif ha'ba'al ha'sofik. You cannot bring a sin offering maybe. You're not allowed to do that. It's a terrible Aveda. I think it's a Kodesh. So if a person is not sure if they did an Aveda for to bring a Chatos, they bring an Asham Talui. They bring an Asham, a male Korban, Talui, which suspends their Chet. which makes the Aveda which they did, which should require a Chatos, but they're not certain whether they brought it, did it or not, it hangs. And the halacha of an Asham Tali is that when they were to find out, if they were to find out that they did the Aveda, they would have a chiyuv to bring a Chatos kavur. The Asham Tali doesn't take away the chiyuv of Chatos, it simply hangs it, it suspends it. So you have 6 kinds of an Asham, and again, I keep on saying the same words. What is the content in all the Ashames? The Ashames are Zochar, not Nekeba, they're male and not female, as we're going to get to later on. And the Mishnah finishes, and it's word for word from the previous Mishnah and from the next Mishnah. Shchitas on Batzofen. All of these 6 are considered Kedesh Kadoshim. They're considered the Holy of Holies, and therefore they have to be shechted in the north. V'kiulam v'chashares, and the blood is gathered in a vessel of service, Batzofen in the north. V'dam anton, and their blood requires. Shtei matanes shehein arbe. This is word for word we discussed last week. 2 gifts, 2 offerings, which add up to 4. So you would do, this is Mizrach right here. This is Mizrach. So this is Darim. The kevish would be here. So you'd put blood on this corner and it would sprinkle on this wall and on this wall. This is called Tzfeinis Ma'aravis. And then you would sprinkle on this corner, which is called Tzfeinis Mizrachis. And this is called Ma'aravis Deremis. You'd put it on those 2 corners, and each time it would go on the 2 walls, so it would be adding up to 4. This is called Shtei Matane Shehein Arba, giving the carbon 2 times, and it adds up to 4. And this is eaten. However, it's only eaten lifnim and into the Beis HaMikdash, which means, if you can imagine it, they ate standing up. A kohen could not sit in the Azara. L'zichrei kahuna, only the male kohenim eat it, which means this is a carbon that was eaten, but it was not eaten by the Baal HaKarbon. It was not eaten by the person who brought the carbon, because after all, it's connected to sin. One way or another is connected to sin. And because it's connected to sin, the Bailam can't eat it. But on the other hand, it's not completely consumed by the Mizbeach. The Koyanim eat it, which shows on a certain maila of the relationship between Yidden and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'chol machal, they can eat it with any other food, they can cook it any way they wished. And it's eaten l'yayim v'lal today, and then the night afterwards, at Chatos till midnight. That's the pshat in this Mishnah. So this Mishnah, which is the 4th Mishnah, it's the 5th Mishnah, of the Perek Aizehu Mikoman, puts together what's called the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur. It's a Korban Shlamim, it's a peace offering, but it's a peace offering which is not brought by an individual. It's a peace offering which is brought by the entire community. And the din is a peace offering brought by the entire community does not have a din doesn't have a din of a regular shlamim, has a din of kachim kadeshim, that only the kohenim get to eat it. And Ashames is a category of avedis. Some even are mezid, and some are shogeg, and some are not even for an aved altogether. The key is the korban that you bring for this particular situation is not a korban chatas, that's not a sin offering, or to use the classic language, it's not a female offering, it's an offering from a zochar. A kufishi is by lakaman, as I'm going to explain soon. So Rabbi say, what I just did was simply I just translated the Mishnah, okay? I just translated the Mishnah. Does anybody want to ask any questions, make any comments? Do tshuva. Shemzach, be ashamed.
I mean, that's not through bringing a carbon.
Right.
No, I'm saying tshuva is not through bringing a carbon.
No, tshuva is you and God in private. Ideally, it's gut-wrenching, it's remorse-filled, and it's, the most important thing about tshuva means that you create an emotion within yourself which is not going to let you do that again.
No, I'm just like telling what I was saying. You did tshuva.
So then you bring an oila. You cannot commune with God. You can't be friendly with God over an aveda. You can't do it. You do tshuva, and then you commune with God over being his friend again. If a person was mavatal anasei.
Present. I'll give you an example.
Right. If a person was mavatal anasei, if you miss doing a mitzvah asei, there's no chiyuv of a korban, but the tradition was you brought a korban olah. Korban olah is not saying, I forgot to put on film, forgive me. A korban is, I want to be a friend again. For the aveda, you have to do tshuva. Tshuva you don't do in the Beis HaMikdash. A korban means kiruv. It means sacrifice, but it means close. All human beings were given the opportunity to come close to Hashem. But you can't come close to Hashem in sin or with sin, and certainly not because of sin. Yidden have a Chatos. It's an amazing thing. A Yid can bring a sin offering for a mistake, for a shegeg, for a miscalculation, which is in itself a wonder. Do you understand? So the korban, but for an aveda done on purpose, there's no asham. At least two of the ashames, asham gezels and asham shefach harufa, the korban is brought with, you did the aveda on purpose, and nevertheless you bring a korban, but you're bringing an asham, not a chatos. It's a, like he keeps pointing out, it's male, not female. Ukafishi is by the I'll get to it later on. Okay, if nobody has any more questions or comments, let me go back and start from the Mishnah again. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur, the offering of a collective Shlamim. A Shlamim, a peace offering which was brought, on behalf of the whole community. There was exactly one such korban a year. It was brought on Shavuos. So here's I guess this is the background of this, or I shouldn't say this is the background of this. This is the background of this that I'm going to share with you. There's a rule that when you bring a korban, unless it's a sin offering, the korban comes along with nesachim, with flour, oil, and water. When you bring a korban, you don't just bring meat, you bring bread and oil and wine. Bread, oil, and wine. Why? What do you mean? Nobody eats meat for a meal. When you eat a meal, you eat bread, you eat meat, and you drink wine. So it's wholesome, right? It's wholesome. So when you brought a korban, there's no salad, and there's no first course, no second course, and no third course. But nevertheless, a korban was, you didn't just bring meat, you put bread, the flour, and the oil, and you drank wine, which brings joy, and the meat was brought in the mizbeach. So as a rule, when you bring a korban, it comes along with a mincha and nesach, with flour and oil, which was bread, and wine, which was drink, and it was a drink that brought joy. So here's the rule. If I have to bring a korban, and if case basically means a shlamim, and with my korban I'm going to bring bread and I'm going to bring wine. The rule is that the most important thing is the animal, and the bread is subordinate, the second to the animal. And there's a lot of nafkaminas in halacha. If I brought an animal and the animal became unfit, what happens to the mincha and the nesach? If I brought an animal, the mincha and the nesach is unfit, what happens to the animal? The rule is, when you bring a korban, the meat is the most important thing and the bread is secondary. With this exception. On Shavuos, we brought bread, Chametz. It was the only Korban Tzibbur from Chametz, and the halacha was that the Korban Tzibbur of Chametz did not go on the Beis HaMikdash. It was brought in, it was lifted up, it was not put on the Mizbeach at all, the Kohen made it.
It's not Pesach though.
Shavuos.
Yeah, so why did we
in the Beis HaMikdash, everything was matzah. There was no chametz in the Beis HaMikdash ever. Ever. A whole year. And the spiritual reason is because of the milos of matzah, bittul and no taste, Kabbalah sel. You're in a holy place. You have to be on a holy level. The exception, there's two exceptions. The other exception was a korban taida, which is a korban yachid, a private person. When you brought chametz, we'll get to that in Mitzvah Hashem later.
The bread that was cooked in the base was cooked in 18 minutes.
Of course. Well, if it was baked, it was often raw. But if it was fried, yes, they were not allowed to rise. The bread in the Beis HaMikdash was all matzah.
I heard of the bread in the Beis HaMikdash was amazing.
You're talking about lechem aponim.
Yeah.
And it was also matzah. And it was only amazing because of a huge miracle. Lechem aponim was matzah. Everything is matzah. There's no chametz in the Beis HaMikdash.
Have you seen pictures of
The only time was Shavuos, right?
Yeah.
You see pictures of
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't look like matzah.
It doesn't look like matzah. You have to see Yemenite matzah. The halacha is you're allowed to bake matzah till a tefach. Tefach is 4 inches. I know, but it has absolutely no air in it.
So why can't they just put matzah on pictures
I
of
think they have a lot.
It was matzah. You have a preconception about what matzah is. We make matzah with 1,000 fears.
So why can't we have matzah though?
Technically you can, but Ashkenazim will not do it. Even many Sfardnot. The Yemenites on Pesach eat what amounts to pita. It's soft, much easier to chew, but it's not chametz. It's not chametz because they don't let it rise. They make a dough, and they put it straight in the oven before it rises. Bread that's not allowed to rise is very hard to eat, and it doesn't taste particularly good. The lachem aponim tasted good, was a nes. It wasn't b'derech hateva. Trust me. It was chewing gum without sugar. It was these big, thick pieces of bread. It was pure dough. It didn't rise. It was matzah. It was matzah. You're just going to have to believe me on this, okay? The only case was the chametz in the Beis HaMikdash, Korban Tzibbur, was lechem with Shavuos, And the Korban Yachid, the only example is the Korban Toida, which we'll get to Mitzvah Hashem in the next Mishnah. And it didn't go on the Mizbeach. It was prepared, it was brought in, it was lifted up, and it was carried out. You wanted to say something? The thing about this Shtei HaLechem that's unusual was, it was the only Korban where the animal was second to the bread. The Ikar Korban was the bread. Along with the bread came the Behema. Al Shtei Kvasim. Usually when you brought a Korban, the most important part of the Korban was the meat. By Shtei HaLechem, the most important part of the Korban was the bread, but the bread came along with meat. The Eibishter couldn't eat the meat, couldn't eat the bread because the bread was Chametz, and Hashem doesn't like Chametz. I don't know why, but he doesn't like Chametz. Okay? So the Chametz was carried in and carried out and eaten by the Koyanim. The Kifsei Atzeres, the part that went on the Beis HaMikdash, was the Korbanos, which were Shlamim, but they were called the Shalmei Tzibbur. Go ahead, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, lechem means bread, so why is it called lechem upon? If it's not, if it's matzah.
Matzah is also called lechem.
Should be called matzah upon.
We have a problem with language here. In the Chumash, very, very often matzah is called lechem. Okay? Man, which came from heaven, is also called lechem. In the Midbar, when the Yidden ate man, they used to call it Hamoiti lechem min hashamayim. And it, believe me, it didn't look like bread, and didn't taste like bread, and didn't feel like bread. Kizraga, there was like tiny little balls that you would scrape off the floor. Now, so here's the point. And this is one of those hashgacha pratiyos that you can't possibly choreograph this better. You have not said Tanya's Chitas today, and I'm assuming that you're going to say it later. But the Tanya Chitas of yesterday and today is describing exactly this Mishnah, and I didn't plan it, it just works out. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya discusses an idea, which I guess is best represented by a classic Hayom Yom. There's actually two Hayom Yoms that say the same thing in slightly different words. The Hayom Yom says, and I quote, "A Yidden's gashmis is ruchnius." The material possessions of a Jew are spiritual. The Rebbe to get a Yid gashmis, God Almighty gives the Jew gashmis, and a Yid macht von gashmis ruchnius, the Jew makes the spiritual material. That means that in amongst the Jewish people there is a presumption that says we don't serve Hashem only when we learn, we don't serve Hashem only when we daven, we serve Hashem when we eat, we serve Hashem when we drink, we serve Hashem when we play, we serve Hashem when we rest, we serve Hashem when we work, we serve Hashem when we earn money, we serve Hashem when we dispense of our wealth to pleasure ourselves, by buying a house, by buying a car, by buying clothing, buying food. Every aspect of the life of a Jew has Kedusha. That's what that statement means. That's what that statement means. A Yidden's gashmis is ruchnius. Ideally, optimally, truthfully, everything a Yid does is serving Hashem. Right? It's a very big mistake that a businessman or a professional, a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher who works in a profession that's arguably secular, that part of his life is not Avodas Hashem. To the contrary, in certain ways, it's more Avodas Hashem than you're davening and learning, because you're fighting the war with the Yetzer Hara, you're out in the world, and so on. So the Alter Rebbe in this Perek says, chapter 34, the Chatos of these days, says and argues that when you have physical food, you give a piece of it to Hashem, and the rest you keep for yourself. But by giving one little piece to Hashem, all that you keep for yourself is uplifted and becomes holy. He says, you have one animal, an entire herd. You give one animal, it raises up your entire herd. You have a whole collection of agriculture, of grain and fruit and whatever it is, legumes, vegetables. You give a little bit of the temeach, a little bit of your agricultural produce, yield to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it raises all of it up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the symbolism of the Shtei HaLechem. The Shtei HaLechem were 2 loaves of bread of Chametz brought in the Beis HaMikdash, which followed an initial Korban brought 50 days before on Pesach, which is called the Korban Olah, after which we start to count Sfiras HaOmer. The difference is Omer was barley, and Shtei HaLechem was wheat. And in halacha, barley is considered ma'achal behema, food for animals, and shtei halechem is considered wheat, considered food for people. And both of these korbanos allowed us to eat the new crop. You may see in many packagings of today of bread, it says Yoshan, Kemach Yoshan. And for the life of me, I do not understand why Lubavitch is not nizir in Yoshan. I really can't understand it. I don't get it. The Rebbe years ago, Tavshin Mem, the Rebbe spoke that nobody's nizir in Yoshan, and he wondered why. Today the Misnag, they made this into a nikir. The biggest machmir by Yoshan is the Alter Rebbe. And the Lubavitcher Hasidim, as far as I know, are not nizir in Yoshan. But Yoshan means you're not allowed to eat anything from the new crop until after you bring this korban. On Pesach you bring the korban noimer, and on Shavuos you bring the korban of shtei halechem. On Pesach you bring the korban noimer from barley, and on Shavuos you bring the korban shtei halechem from wheat. Which means to say, when you produce agricultural produce, food that grows from the ground, you give a little bit to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the little bit that you give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, arba yades yelachem, it brings the kedusha, and all the rest of you keep for yourself. Every time you eat a piece of food, after you gave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu the shtickle which he's entitled to, which is his, there's a kedusha in it. That's the korban which is associated with these words, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur means they brought a shlamim on behalf of the whole congregation, on behalf of the whole community. And the purpose of this Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur was, it was al shtei kvasim. It was secondary to a little bread. Relatively speaking, a little bit of bread. And in that little bit of bread that you gave to Hashem, which the kohanim ate, you brought a kedusha in kol hatzemeach. Everything you kept for yourself, whether it was grains or whether it was legumes or whether it was vegetables or it was fruit. There's a kedusha in everything that a Jew partakes of. It's like I said, it's consistent with a idea that there's nothing that a Yid can do in his life, if he does it correctly, which is not serving Hashem, even if it's about buying himself a house and a car and clothing and food. Everything is avodas Hashem, and you first begin by giving a little bit to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it brings the kedusha into what you keep for yourself. Our Mishnah is not dealing with the bread. Our Mishnah is dealing with the korban, which came along with this bread. And the halacha was that you're giving the Eibishter a little bit. And in this chus of giving the Eibishter a little bit, the rest that you keep for yourself as a kedusha. This korban was holy, and it was eaten only by kohanim. Meaning to say, this korban was not eaten by us. Every single Jew has this power, has this possibility, that his personal physical life should be holy. But in order for a person's physical life to be holy, he gives some of that first to Hashem. The piece that he gives to Hashem, it's called a peace offering. It's called a Shlamim. But the private citizen cannot eat it. The regular, only the kohanim eat it. The kohanim eat it on our behalf. When kohanim eat it on our behalf, it's not yet the idea of a full shlamim. A full shlamim means that we push and sit and eat with Hashem. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur, that we're not eating with Hashem. After this korban is brought, what's going to be left over, we have that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But this korban itself is eaten only by the kohanim. Go ahead, Reuven Yosef, Shlita.
So these days, in order for us to give to Hashem, do we do that through mercy?
Of course, absolutely.
That's our.
Of course.
That's like compared to those days to today.
They also gave Maisa. That's the whole idea, yeah. When you make a loaf of bread, you separate challah. Same principle. The first piece you give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The rest you keep for yourself. And by the giving of a little bit to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the part that you keep also has the kedusha. Now let's talk about Osham. You have something to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we say this every day.
Every single day.
Why don't we only say? We should only say it on like the days that we're supposed to bring this korban. Because saying this means it's because we don't have basic makers instead of bringing the korban, right? So why are we saying this every single day when we don't bring this korban every single day?
This is the beauty of Torah. This is a loaded question, and the truth of the matter is we should have a whole shiur on this question. Okay? In the Gemara, Torah is called Chayei Olam, eternal life. Tefillah is called Chaye Sha'ah. Tefillah is called momentary life. What's the difference? Chaye means I'm connected to a level of life which is above time. Chaye Sha'ah means I'm connected to a level of life which is about today. I need food, I daven for food. I need clothing, I daven for clothing. The whole power of Torah is that when I am studying Torah, I'm higher than time. Which means anytime I sit down and I learn the Torah of Yom Kippur, right now for me it's Yom Kippur. With all the upside. So we say every single korban every day. We say Yom Kippur. We say Yom Kippur. We say every single korban is said every single day. Because we take a piece of Torah and incorporated it into the Siddur. We say it as part of our tefillah, but it's really the Torah Shabbat tefillah. And the idea is that on this level, any person, there's no limitations of a Kohen or a Levi, Yisrael, or a man or a woman or a Torah or a Tuma'ah in the Beis HaMikdash, outside the Beis HaMikdash, in Eretz Yisrael, outside. So all those limitations go away. Torah takes us above time and above space, and it's kol ha'oisek b'Torah k'ilu. By studying this korban, it's as if we brought this korban with all the upside of bringing this korban, without any downside of bringing this korban, because Torah is called Chaye, it is above time.
You said we only bring like the Chametz korban once a year. So if we say it every day, it's like we brought the Chametz korban every day, and then we do something about it.
First of all, we're above time. So every day we're doing it, we're above time. And second of all, the Mishnah doesn't talk about the Chametz. The Mishnah talks about the animal that goes along with the Chametz. The Mishnah doesn't mention the word Chametz. I mentioned the word Chametz. Because I'm trying to explain the concept of this korban. The concept of this korban is that you're bringing a korban along with bread, that you're giving a little bit of bread to Hashem, that all your bread that you're keeping for yourself has a kedusha. Right? And therefore it's only eaten by koyanim. But the Mishnah speaks of the behemoth, not of the bread. Okay? Now, so this is the concept. I'm bringing a korban in order to set the stage, to bring a kedusha in everything I'm keeping for myself. So Rabbi say, here comes the chap. Here comes the chap. The chap is as follows. Now this is, I'm saying it once and I'm going to say it again by Asham. I said the same thing twice. We had a number of conversations. We're sitting, this is our 13th class on Aizehu Mikoman, so we've been here a while, okay? I've told you a number of times already that when a person is doing tshuva, there's two concepts of tshuva. There's tshuva tato and tshuva elah. There's a lower tshuva and a higher tshuva. Each one of these two levels has within themselves innumerable different levels. What's the difference between the lower tshuva and the higher tshuva? The Abai said the difference between the lower tshuva and the higher tshuva is the lower tshuva is about sin. The higher tshuva is about relationship with God. The lower tshuva means I did something wrong and I want to fix it. The higher tshuva is the reason I did something wrong because I stopped thinking about Hashem and I want to renew my relationship with Him. A Chatos, Rabbi Isai, is a sin offering brought for an Aveda. I did a particular Aveda and I bring a particular Chatos with the kavanah that this Chatos goes for this Aveda specifically. An Olah, which we learned about the last 2 weeks, and the Asham, which we're going to be learning today, Mitzvah Hashem, and the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur VaAshamos share one property. These are 3 Korbanos that have something to do with correction. An oil has to do with correction for missing an Achei or for after I brought the Korban Chatos. An Asham obviously has to do with correction. I did an Aveda, I bring a Korban Asham, which is a sin offering. And Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur, even though it's not brought for an Aveda, but it's brought for the idea of taking my private wealth and giving some of it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that the rest of it that I keep for myself has a kedusha. The korban that you bring is equivalent to tshuva elah. In other words, this Mishnayos, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur VaAshamos, and the Mishnah before, ha'olah, share the following property. I'm doing a korban which has to do with correction, but I'm not focusing on what I'm correcting. I'm focusing on connection to Hashem. Okay, I want to say this one more time. The previous Mishnah Olah and this Mishnah, which speaks about 2 Korbanos, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur and Asham, share the following property. I am bringing a korban for something that needs correction. Either it's a sin which needs correction, or it's my personal wealth which I want to bring a possible holiness to it. But I am not going to bring a korban that focuses on the corrective aspect. I'm going to bring a korban focused on my connection to the Eibishter. Finished. If a person is in a spiritually bad way, if I'm not in a good place spiritually, I've fallen off the wagon. It happens to people. Yeah? How do you fix it? I've fallen off the wagon. I've lost my edge. I've lost my spirituality. I've lost my connection to God. How do you fix it? One solution is you take each thing that's broken, and fix it. This is wrong, I'll fix it. This is wrong, I'll fix it. This is wrong, I'll fix it. Another solution is I'm going to think about Hashem. I'm going to develop a stronger and more intimate connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and hope that if my connection to Hashem is strong, automatically my ability to, so to speak, get back on the wagon and do right and not do wrong will be empowered and strengthened. That's the idea of an olah. That's how I'm explaining to you a Shalmei Tzibbur, and that's the concept of an asham. These three Korbanos are me connecting to Hashem. Now, there may be something wrong with me, but I'm not focusing on my wrong. If I did something wrong and I'm focusing on my wrong, we call that a Chatos, which are the first three Mishnayos in this Perek. If I did something wrong, or something which needs to be righted, and I don't want to focus on the wrong, I want to focus on my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and allow the wrong or the things to need to be righted to right itself, I bring an olah, I bring a Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur, and I bring an asham. That's the significance of Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur. That's how I'm explaining it to you. I must tell you that this Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur, which is the Talas Yankiv, the Rameir Ben Gabbai, he says the author of the Vedas HaKodesh, who says that Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur is a korban le'em, to the mother, which is the madrega of Bina, which is trivial law. It's very simple. The Ashames, there's a lot of commentary, but Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur is the only commentary I found in any of the Sfarim that explained the time of this korban. It's very, very difficult to find material. I mean, the halachas of the Korbanos are easy to find, but the tam, the pnimit, the only comment I found for Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur was the Sefer Talas Yankiv, who says that this is a korban le'em, which is Bina, which is trivial law. That's why I'm explaining it this way. So this is the chat. I am bringing a korban to take my personal property, bring a holiness into it by giving a piece of it to Hashem. The piece for the gift to Hashem is 2 loaves of bread. Along with the bread is going to be a korban. That korban is a korban that renews my connection to God. And by renewing my connection to God, it becomes possible for me to make my personal wealth, the home I live in, the car I drove, the clothing I wear, the food I eat, and the other material pleasures in which I engage and entertain and enjoy, a kedusha. But it's indirect. In other words, I'm not saying, I used something gashmis incorrectly and I want to fix it. He said, no. I'm going to strengthen my connection to Hashem, and by my strengthening my connection to Hashem, automatically this is going to have a kedusha. That's why this korban, although it's eaten, it's not eaten by us. It's eaten by the kohanim. And the kohanim are not representing us. The kohanim are representing kedusha. They're representing atzilus, as I touched on in the third Mishnah of Chatos, and I'm going to get to later on. Questions or comments? Questions or comments, Rabbi Yisai? Okay, now one more point. Go ahead.
Let's say we do a sin or we do whatever. Should we say this again? When you bring that card,
you should know a rule that our culture, the Chabad culture, which is the worst culture to belong to if you're a paranoid person. If you want to have a scorecard with God, become a misnagid, become a svadi. It's just not part of our program. We're not into segulas. We're not into magic. I do an aved, I write a check for so many dollars, and it doesn't work that way. Chassidus is very, very much into a connection to Hashem. And by the virtue of our connection to Hashem, we raise ourselves above sin. So as it relates to your question, the answer to the question is, we do what says in Siddur as prescribed. We don't do extra.
Yeah, but it says in the Torah that when you sin, you have to bring Chametz.
But there's no Beis HaMikdash.
have this.
The reason I'm able to bring a korban, because the korban is not on the sin. The korban is on my relationship with Hashem. Did people understand? Yeah, mit verstanden? Okay, let me dive in. No. This you do once a day. And by the way, you do a sin on purpose, you don't bring a chatos. You do a sin on purpose, you do tshuva. A chas you do for an aveda which is done by mistake, by accident, b'shoigig, whatever the word shoigig means. Okay? So the answer to your question is, bichlal in Hasidus, especially in our generation, the answer to weakness, the answer to sin is not to think about the sin and try to give the Eibush a couple of pennies that he should somehow feel happy about the fact that he's been paid off for your Aveda. We try to strengthen our relationship with Hashem. You understand? Now I'm going to finish the class with this point. You keep asking me, what is the significance of a Korban Olah being Zohar? It's a sin offering and it's male, it's not female. So I'm going to tell you something mind-blowing. When I cannot say it's mind-blowing because I don't even know if this is true. It's just my take on it, okay? That Amak, the Moshe Cordova, who has the best commentary on Siddur of the Mikoman, because he translates each word. And Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur, he doesn't translate. Says that Ashames, a Korban Olah, is litaken hapgam hayadua. Hanasa ayadei ha'oven hahu. That's what he says. You have 6 Hashames, they're all for the same reason. For the notable sin, which he doesn't mention. The notable sin that he doesn't mention is Zedel of Atolah. Now what does Zedel of Atolah have to do with Hashem Gezeles, Hashem Me'iles, Hashem Shif? What does it do with the other? But that's what he says. There's a very, very little commentary from the Ramak on this here Mishnah. So again, everything that follows now is my interpretation. The fact I told you, the pshat is mine. The Alter Rebbe brings Nigeres HaTshuva, Perek Dalet, that it says in the Yeshiva Chochmah, it says in Sifrei Musar, that for Zedel of Atolah Tshuva doesn't help. And the Alter Rebbe says Zedel of Atolah Tshuva doesn't help. For Gili Arayis Tshuva helps, which is much worse than Zedel of Atolah. How could Zedel of Atolah Tshuva not help? And the Alter Rebbe answers, for Zedel of Atolah, Tshuva Tatah doesn't help Tshuva Elah. You need to have Tshuva Elah. Now the Rebbe in his Sichos points out, and I want to make this very clear, that even though for Zedel of Atolah you have to have Tshuva Elah, but you have to do Tshuva Tatah also. I don't want to get into that technical thing. Tshuva Tatah means I focus on the sin. Tshuva Elah is I focus on renewing my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Pshat Shebedavet is, Rabbi say, when people do an Aveda, what is the wrong? Most Avedas, when people do an Aveda, they wrong themselves. In other words, when I do something wrong, I'm hurting myself. Spiritually speaking, I'm hurting myself. Zedel of Atolah is a symptom of not hurting myself, but of a diminished connection with God. That's the Havana. Why is Zedel of Atolah and Aveda if we should have Dafke Tshuva Elah, not Tshuva Tatah? Because what does Tshuva Elah mean? I'm not focusing on the sin. How did this happen to me? How did this happen to me? It happened to me because I wasn't paying enough attention to Hashem. So the tshuva is not to say I did this wrong. The tshuva is to renew my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu so that such a thing shouldn't happen. In other words, it's an interesting thing. Tshuva Elah is higher than Tshuva Tatah. But Tshuva Elah is positive. Tshuva Elah is not I did an Aveda and I feel bad and I'm fixing it and I'm bringing a Korban Chatos. Tshuva Elah means I have an opportunity to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moreover, not only do I have an opportunity to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if I stop paying attention to that relationship, and I became, what's the word? I started taking that relationship for granted. I can renew it. Right? You're all going to get married, and you're going to have a wife, and you're going to love each other very much, but you're going to be married for a very, very long time. And a lot of stuff is going to happen. And over time, you stop paying attention. Yeah, and then you have to do tshuva. Every couple from time to time has to do tshuva. They have to remember that they have children and they have a mortgage and they have bills and they have all kinds of stuff that keeps them fully busy, but they have to pay attention to each other. right? Which means I didn't do anything wrong. We have to renew. We have to do something to make ourselves feel closer. Teshuvah Allah means I have a relationship with the Eibishter. I neglected it. The symptom of that neglect is that things happen. I don't fix the things. I fix the relationship so those things don't happen. So the Ramak, in my humble opinion, when he says that a Asham is Fechata Yedua, is telling something very amazing. That's consistent with the Reishas Chacham, which I'll tell you gets a tshuva. Some Avedas, the tshuva is not the lower tshuva, it's the higher tshuva. Most Avedas, you did something wrong, you have to fix the wrong. Because you did something wrong. This Aveda, it's not what you did wrong, it's what happened to your relationship with God. If you stop having a relationship with God, this occurs. So the tshuva is tshuva law. Again, the Rebbe writes for Fedish and Lekutei Sichos that you have to do tshuva Torah also. But the fact that it says in Kabbalah Sfarim, and it's brought in the Tanya, that for this Aved, the tshuva law, is because this is where the sin is. In Kabbalistic language, it's a sin in Moichin. In practical language, it's a sin in lack of connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says in Helikas Sfarim that this is the Inyan from this Aveda is almost impossible in Deiriseinu Eile. It's talking about a oinus and a shegig. The only way a person is nishma from these inyanim is to be focused on the Eibishter completely. So when a person has a chasar in these areas, the tshuva is about to focus on Hashem. And this Rabbi Isai explains the point. When you bring a carbon, when you do an Aveda, you bring a carbon, the carbon is female. And female means chalishus. It shows on weakness. That I'm correcting. In this Mishnah, you did an Aveda and the carbon is male. Why is the carbon male? Because you're not fixing the wrong. An Asham is not fixing a wrong. An Asham is fixing the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur VaAshamos share this property. And to be sure, they shared this property with Olah, with the previous Mishnah. Olah, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur, and Ashamos are the same thing. Something needs correction. I'm not correcting by focusing what's wrong. I'm correcting by connecting to God. Period. In the case of Olah, Hashem gets it all. In the case of the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibbur and the Asham, Hashem gets a little piece. The rest of it is eaten by the Koyanim. We're going to have to get to that in Mitzvah Hashem in later classes. But what are these two categories of carbon tell us? That when something needs to be corrected, sometimes you don't fix the wrong. You don't say, I did this, I had to fix this. You reconnect to Hashem. And this explains why, in a way, a Asham is more kal than a Chatos. Halachically, there's a machlekes in Tanoim. Some Tanoim hold it the same. Rabbi Elazar ben Hurknes holds the same halachas of a Asham applied to Chatos to Asham about Chametz Chatos meses, Chametz Hashamis meses. But you don't pass like that shita. The halacha is that Asham is less strict than Chatos, but in another way, it's higher than a Chatos. Because a Chatos, I'm focusing on my sin. In a Asham, I'm focusing on my relationship with Hashem. And it explains this weird idea that in certain instances, an Asham is effective for an Aveda I do on purpose. I stole money, and I lied, and I swore falsely with intent, but I admitted that I lied. So I bring a korban. But I cannot bring a korban for a sin. Because if you do a sin, especially on purpose, go hide in the corner and cower and shame. Don't come to the Beis HaMikdash and celebrate it. How are you bringing a korban for stealing and swearing falsely, which is considered chamuris in halach? Shavuos is considered chamuris, even though it's not necessarily einish misa.